They say time heals all wounds, but they don't tell you about the scars, about the nights when you lie awake imagining her with him, the rage that eats you alive, the silence that follows. Lauren, she's gone. But her betrayal? That's a wound I carry every damn day, and now I'm supposed to let her go. To forgive? Never. The game's over, but the war, it's just begun. Baseball requires players to manage their feelings until the very end of the game. Bryan had played in many matches where his team held a good lead late in the competition. When he was younger, it was understandable that he sometimes relaxed too much, thinking the game was as good as won, and most of the time it was dot. But there were those times when the other team wouldn't give up. They found a way to hit the ball, made clever plays, and put pressure on the pitcher who was not ready. Eventually, after some struggles, they brought in the best relief pitcher, but it was often too late. The other team started to believe they could win like they hadn't in the earlier innings. Suddenly, his teammates began to doubt themselves. Bryan had learned to deal with these tough moments in Little League, then in high school, through different levels of competition, and even in college and the minor leagues. Now, as a professional player at the highest level, he had learned to separate his feelings from the game's reality. And the reality was this: his beloved wife, the person he thought he could trust completely, had let him down. She had turned away from him and made choices that hurt him deeply. She had shared a part of herself with someone else, a part that he believed only belonged to him. Friends should not treat each other this way. People often hurt each other like this. That was the hardest thing for Bryan to accept. He realized that he and Lauren were not different from anyone else. They were just as flawed as all humans. He had foolishly hoped for something better. Bryan also had one strength that helped him cope with this sudden pain. He started studying the classics in high school. He signed up for Mrs. Reichel's Latin class because Megan was taking it too. Over the summer, a friend had shown her a scene from an old movie which made her think that Latin was exciting. Even though the movie was in English, she seemed to have a thrill about the language. Bryan missed her very much. They would study together, but it was a slow process. After Bryan read a few paragraphs from their assignment, Megan would engage with him enthusiastically. Luckily, Bryan remembered with a smile that her bedroom was above the family garage, and the door could lock from the inside. They continued learning together until that summer afternoon when everything changed. Megan's passing did not stop Bryan's interest in ancient languages. He continued with Latin and began taking Greek at the junior college. He even signed up for online courses in Aramaic. He read a lot. He explored works by Herodotus, Euripides, and Plato, along with poetry, history, plays, and philosophy. He often wished that Megan could still be there with him, excited by words from long ago, sharing their learning. He became a thoughtful person who viewed the world through the lessons of history. If his wife left him for another man, he saw it as something that had happened throughout time, just like in stories of Helen of Troy and many others. Sometimes it gave him comfort to understand things in this broader way. Sometimes he worried that the deep feelings he believed were only his own might be normal and, in a way, less special. But he viewed his life from a broader perspective. When he realized that Lauren had truly left him, he felt sad for a while before moving on to the next chapter of his life. His talent didn't stop him from crying like a hurt child. He cried for himself, for all the lovers throughout history, for every person who had ever felt a broken heart. Most of all, he cried for Lauren. He had promised to protect and support her, but now she faced challenges alone. When he was in Texas, Bryan often went to the small cemetery in Hondo. He would sit under the ash tree by Megan's grave, pondering the complexities of life. If he looked up, he could see the wooden sign he had made and placed there a week after her burial. To the world, my love lies here without life. To me, she will remain alive forever. His lips moved silently as he read his own young, imperfect translation. So what? The Globe didn't care. The local news didn't care. ESPN didn't care. The fans didn't care. Nobody was worried that Bryan Monick was in his big, empty house, and the garden in the back was brown and dying. They only cared that the Yankees were doing well, and just like that, Bryan returned. His face appeared large and clear on the Fenway center field scoreboard the night he stepped back onto his familiar field. The packed crowd of 37,651 fans stood up when he was introduced, cheering loudly. Their excitement filled the whole park and echoed down the streets. He was home. He took off his cap and felt happy to participate in this special tradition. This place was his heart. He belonged here. He felt the ground beneath him and noticed the grounds crew watching him closely. He looked calm and ready, but inside he was nervous. His stomach felt uneasy, as if it could turn at any moment. These pre-game jitters were familiar. He felt them before every game. Tonight, he worried his ankle might hurt again or that his hip wouldn't hold up. He rocked on his feet, watching the pitcher get ready. When the ball flew towards the plate, Bryan focused solely on that fast-moving white sphere, blocking out everything else. The Tigers had a quiet start in the first inning. Bryan dashed to the dugout and put on his batting gloves. The bat boy handed him his favorite bat, a 33.5-inch piece of birch that weighed 31 ounces. Bryan swung it a few times, feeling its weight. He loved the familiar feel of it. The bat was ready for action. The first batter walked to first base. It wasn't hard for him. The Tigers' pitcher wasn't throwing well. Most of his pitches were not even close to the strike zone. When it was Bryan's turn, he stepped into the box, waggled his bat, bent his knees, and prepared himself mentally. He thought about the situation. The pitcher wouldn't want to fall behind again. To avoid that, he might throw a slower pitch to get back in control. The book explained that when this player didn't focus, the ball was left just a bit higher than he wanted. The pitcher got ready. Bryan began to prepare. He imagined his mind like a fast camera, one that could catch many images in a second, and he turned it on just as the pitcher moved his arm. The ball came toward him, and his mind captured it, slowed it down, allowing his body to find the right space where he thought the ball would meet the swing of his bat. Should batters choose to swing based on how the ball moves, or decide ahead of time to swing and adjust their bat to hit it? This question has been around for a long time. Bryan realized that for pitches going 96 miles per hour or faster, he needed to decide to swing early to connect well with the ball. For pitches below that speed, or if the ball moved, he would wait just a moment to let his instincts take over. If a pitcher threw faster than 96 miles per hour with movement, he just guessed. This pitch came in a little slow and a bit high. It was outside, but close enough to be a strike. The Boston team decided to be bold here. The third base coach signaled for a play to run with the pitch. The runner took off but was careful enough to get back to first base safely. This gave Bryan the choice to swing or hold back. He swung. The first baseman for Detroit moved to his right but didn't make it in time. Bryan hit the ball past the runner and down the line. The right fielder was too far toward the center, and Bryan's hit grazed the uneven grass of the right field line, bounced off the wall just inside fair territory, and sped past the outfielder who wasn't very experienced. The young player rushed after the ball, making a tricky move in the confusing angles of Fenway Park. By the time the center fielder got there, picked up the rolling ball and threw it to his teammate, the Red Sox player had already scored, and Bryan was sliding safely into third base. The crowd erupted with excitement, filling the small stadium with cheers. Bryan called for a timeout, got up, and brushed off the dirt that had collected on his uniform from his slide. His hip felt good. He felt good. He was back. In the end, the team lost to the Tigers. The starting pitcher lasted 4 innings, but walked 3 batters and allowed a double. The relief pitchers had a rough time, and the game ended 8-3. Bryan was disappointed about the loss, but was happy with how he played. He had 2 hits in 4 at-bats, and made all the plays in the field without making mistakes. After the game, he received some treatment and felt no pain in his body. Long after the game, he sat at his locker, holding his new bat and deep in thought. He didn't want to go back to his lonely home that reminded him of Lauren. If this had been the Cape, he might have mingled with fans and looked for someone to chat with. He considered checking out the nightlife in Boston, where there were nightclubs, bowling alleys, and places to hang out, all filled with potential new friends. But he just couldn't bring himself to move. That felt like a game for younger people. Being out there could lead to trouble online, and he didn't want that. Instead, he took a marker from his locker and wrote on the barrel of his bat, Chronicles, the lightning bolt of Zeus. Below it, he wrote, Megan. After thinking for a moment, he added a small heart after her name. He felt a bit like a young girl while doing that, but it didn't matter. Tonight's loss was just part of the team's downward trend. You could feel it in the clubhouse, like a storm getting closer. The players tried all the old superstitions and even came up with new ones, but they kept finding new ways to lose games they had once won easily. Bryan walked through the empty parking lot, got into his Jeep, and drove slowly back to the house he used to call home. The team traveled to Baltimore and Tampa Bay, but they played as if something bad was following them. They managed to lose 2 out of 3 games to the Orioles and repeated that against the Rays. In other years, this would have been a disaster, but surprisingly, the Yankees couldn't take advantage of their slump. They lost 2 home games to the A's and 2 out of 4 to the Royals, but that didn't matter. Bryan and his teammates stepped off the plane at Logan in a bad mood. The Yankees were 3 games behind. On the day off after traveling, Bryan drove to Cambridgeport and parked his Jeep in front of a large house near the MIT campus. Before he could ring the doorbell, Bree came running out onto the porch and hugged him tightly. "It's so good to see you," she said as she pulled him inside, introducing him to her friends. Bryan could tell they were a bit in awe of him, but really, he was the one who was impressed by them. He understood the hard work and cleverness it took to reach their level, qualities he thought were far more valuable than being able to hit a baseball. He left with Bree and her friend Camilla, a tall girl with wild, curly dark hair and a charming gap between her front teeth. "Camilla is my girlfriend," Bree said as they were getting into the car. "I figured that out," Bryan replied with a smile. "So, is she a witch?" "Camilla, are you a witch?" Camilla laughed like a giggling kid. "No, I'm studying to be a doctor." He took them to the Museum of Fine Art, where they spent an hour exploring the collection and another hour in a special Turner exhibit. After that, they went out for lunch at a deli in Brookline. He dropped them off, and Camilla thanked him warmly before heading inside. Bree took his hand. "How are you holding up?" she asked, looking concerned. "I'm okay," he said. "I miss her." Bree wrapped her arms around him briefly. "After the season, we need to have a serious chat. Witch to warlock." He looked down into her eyes. "Are all witches lesbians?" "No, I'm bi," she said with a light laugh. "So," she let him go, still laughing. "So that's not the reason why well, you and I never went further." She tilted her head. "It's something else. Something very different. Love you." And then she dashed inside. Bryan stood on the porch for a moment, trying to understand what she meant. He figured that even the most powerful warlocks wouldn't know what made women tick. When Bryan returned home, he felt refreshed. He called a landscaper to help replant his neglected garden. He made a grocery list and ordered food. He also called his parents to catch up on family news. He spoke to both of his brothers, and they each told him the same strange joke. Then he gathered his thoughts and called his in-laws. He told them that he and Lauren had separated. Her mother took the news hard and started crying, apologizing repeatedly. Bryan found it interesting that she seemed to think the split was Lauren's fault. Mr. Esposito was calmer, but still clearly upset. He asked what had happened, but Bryan said that Lauren would have to explain it to them herself. Bryan promised to visit them the next time he was in Texas, then hung up. He felt a deep sense of loss. The Espositos were good, honest people, and he would have liked to remain part of their family. Once that task was finished, he picked up the phone again. It felt heavy, as if it weighed 10 pounds. He called his agent and shared the unfortunate news. "Gosh darn it," Parker said, his Brooklyn accent strong. Bryan always found it amusing to hear Parker Brannan's voice. The man had a degree from Stanford and an MBA from Harvard, but still sounded like he was running a pizza shop. "Is she gone for good?" "I'm afraid so," Bryan replied. "Is there any hope?" Bryan thought about it, but he couldn't give a reassuring answer. "Probably not," Parker sighed. "Gosh darn it. Okay, I'm sending you the name of the lawyer who handles these matters. I'll arrange a meeting." He faded out for a moment, then came back loudly. 10 tomorrow. Their office is near the Common. You'll have plenty of time to get to batting practice afterward." "Thanks, Parker. No problem. I'll see you the day after tomorrow. I'm coming to Boston for a couple of weeks. We can go out for drinks." "You are unbelievable." What would Fiona say if she heard you talking like that? Parker laughed. Chasing and catching are two very different things, my friend. Good luck. The Yankees were 2 games behind. Juliet Martin's office was on the 10th floor of a Milk Street building made of dark amber stone that looked shiny both inside and outside. Bryan stood in the lobby looking at the stylish decorations and thinking about how great it was to be a professional baseball player. A regular person would have to wait weeks for a meeting with someone in such a fancy place. But he had gotten an appointment in less than a day. It felt like not having to carry his own bags at the airport. The receptionist led him into a spacious office, much larger than many homes. The warm autumn sun shone through tall windows. Bryan wished he had brought his sunglasses. In a beam of light, a woman sat on a sofa, looking at some papers. She stood up, smiling, and reached out her hand. She looked about 50 years old, was tall and graceful, with dark hair that reached her shoulders and a little bit of gray. Even in the bright light, her eyes stood out, shiny and strong, matching the stone of the building. "Mr. Monick, I'm Juliet Martin. You can call me Julie." She smiled, then let go of his hand and pointed to someone behind him. "And my colleague who will be working with us." Bryan turned and saw another woman. "Miss Lowell." Melody shook his hand. "Just call me Mel." "Why?" Bryan replied, a little annoyed. "I never did before." Julie looked between them. "Mel mentioned that you know each other. Is that going to be a problem, Mr. Monick?" "Bryan," Bryan replied, keeping his gaze on Melody. "Not a problem for me." "Good," Julie said. "Now let's get started." Bryan settled into an armchair across from the 2 lawyers and explained the situation that had brought him here while they took notes. "Any prenuptial agreements?" Julie asked when he finished. Bryan shook his head. "When we got married, I had the rest of my signing bonus saved up. It wasn't a lot." "Lauren can make a claim on that." "She can have it," he said. "She'll need it. She has a degree in early childhood education but hasn't worked before. Then she might want support after the split, unless she finds someone else." Julie looked at her notes. "Owen Archer. Is that possible?" "I don't know. I don't really want to find out. I haven't talked to her." "I assume you haven't thought about getting back together with her?" Bryan shook his head. "All right," Julie said, wrapping up. "I'll have papers prepared by our Rhode Island office, and our team will locate her and serve her the papers. If she doesn't fight it, we can finish this in about 60 days. Rhode Island is quick, unless she puts up a fight." "I can't see why she would." "Let's hope she doesn't. That way Mr. Brannon won't have to wait." Bryan's attention snapped back. "What does Parker have to do with this?" Julie jotted down more notes. "He'll explain. It's about property gained after the marriage ended. A lot will depend on whether your wife hires a lawyer who knows your works agreement." Bryan opened his mouth but couldn't find the right words, so he fell silent. The park was empty as Bryan walked out from the cool shade under the stands and headed to the bleachers. He took a seat in his favorite spot, the red seat. This seat was where, back in 1946, Ted Williams hit a ball over 500 feet and even dented a fan's hat. Bryan liked that Williams was slender. Even though he was a Marine pilot, he was still fit enough to earn the nickname the Splendid Splinter, which he used to poke fun at the local sports writers he called the Knights of the Keyboards. Ted and the media didn't always see eye to eye. The lesson was clear. You didn't need huge muscles to hit a baseball well. He needed strong hands, arms, and good coordination. His vision and reflexes had to be sharp, too. Big muscles reminded him of a football player, which then made him think of that player's wife. That thought changed his bright day into a gloomy one. What did his agent have to do with all of this? He shook off his daydream and sat up straight to grab his phone. "Hello, Bryan," Parker said. "How did your meeting with Miss Martin go?" "Really well. Now tell me what I'm missing. What does my divorce have to do with the new agreement?" "Well, first, keep this to yourself, okay?" "Okay." "The news is that the new agreement will be very favorable for free agents, especially for players like you." "Ah," Bryan said, understanding. "The CBA, or Collective Bargaining Agreement, is the main contract between the Players' Union and Major League Baseball. It covers many things, including how many years a player needs to play in the majors before they can become a free agent. That's when the big money comes in, as teams compete for free agents. A good player could see their salary multiply significantly when they sign with the team that offers the most. You understand. And you're in a great position right now. The second baseman market is weak right now, likely for the next few years. I'm working my usual magic with your team. I think the Sox will want to keep you. They'll probably try to offer you a deal to prevent you from becoming a free agent. What kind of deal? Parker paused. Tonight, think about a 10-year deal at $25 million a year. That's just the start. Guaranteed. Bryan stared in disbelief at the perfectly smooth green surface of the pool table that was his workplace. $250 million. How much did Ted Williams earn in 1946? He asked. How should I know? Parker shot back. I wasn't his agent, but if I had been, I would have gotten him a better deal. Bryan chuckled. To put it simply, his agent continued, we wait until your marriage with Miss Martin is over before we start talking money. Otherwise, your wife will want part of it. We've got enough lawyers involved as is, so keep quiet about it. Got it? Yeah. Are you sure you went to Harvard? With 3 games left in the season, the Yankees were still 1 game behind, unable to take advantage of the Red Sox's weak performance over the past month. After practice, Bryan got dressed in a clubhouse that felt as cheerful as a gloomy day. Even Rollins was quiet. Not a single joke or witty comment came from him. What's up, Mitch? Bryan asked. We're in the lead. Why does everyone look so down? The tall first baseman sighed. 2 years ago, we were in a similar spot. We were ahead by 3 games with 10 left to play, and we didn't even make the wild card. Everything fell apart. A lot of us remember that. It feels familiar. Bryan didn't like hearing that. He had read about their past struggles but thought they were behind them, like a story from long ago. How could his teammates still let that bother them? That's not right. He felt anger rise in him. Not right. They had a chance to take control of the division, and here they were, acting like they were afraid to step up. He finished getting dressed and stood up. He grabbed his bat and waved it around, channeling his frustration. He wished he had a catchy line to say, like, check out my strength, or I'm here to have fun and win. Instead, he grabbed his glove, looked around at the group of so-called experts, and walked out. That night, he really played well. Bryan hit 2 doubles, one hard off the wall, and another into the gap in the outfield. Rollins also hit a home run, and their team won by 2 runs. Sadly, the Yankees won their game too. Later, he walked around his big, quiet house, thinking about getting a dog. Would it be unfair to leave a dog alone so often? He made a note to look up local dog care services. Maybe he should think about getting cats instead. They could take care of themselves better. He turned on the TV to watch game highlights. He focused closely, pausing and rewinding to watch his 2 doubles again. Was he moving his hands too quickly? Was his foot too far from the plate? He decided he would review more footage the next day. His phone buzzed. When he picked it up, he expected it to be Parker. It was Lauren. Hello? Bryan? He took a deep breath and closed his eyes. It was a struggle not to express his emotions, to hold back his feelings. Something inside him said that none of that would change anything. She had moved on. Hello, Lauren. How are you? Those were the hardest words he ever had to say. I saw you tonight. The game was on TV. He guessed her boyfriend wasn't there, otherwise she wouldn't be watching him play or calling later. You looked good, she said quietly. He held back the urge to say how well he felt, that there was nothing wrong with him at all. He hesitated to tell her about the chance for a contract to continue. He used to share everything with Lauren, all the little details of his life, the funny moments, and the important changes. They were a team. Nothing was hidden between them, but that was over. He knew he would keep going. The world would keep turning. Still, it hurt deeply. He felt a real ache in his chest, like something was missing where affection once thrived. What do you want? He tried to speak without anger or blame. There was a long silence. I just wanted to hear your voice. Bryan glanced out the window. He had to pretend he was someone else to avoid breaking down. Lauren, you will be getting some papers soon. Do you have a lawyer? No. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Please get one. Look it over. Let's move forward. But no, Lauren. Just listen. He noticed red lights in the sky. A plane was landing at TF Green Airport. Some passengers were going home. Some would be greeted by loving family members. I understand why you left, Lauren. I'm not okay with it, but I understand. Just nod if you can hear me. She let out a small cry, followed by a faint laugh. Have I ever lied to you? No, she replied right away. Do you still trust me? There was a pause. Trust had never been a problem between them. Yes, she answered. Then please, please, find someone to talk to. You need to figure out what's going on. I'm not, he interrupted. Do this for me. I'll help with it. Please, Lauren. He paused, and the emotional pain dug deeper. You were my best friend, he finally said. I want you to be happy. You are a wonderful and smart person. You deserve joy. I still care for you, she said softly. Bryan, she sighed. It's all over. Her voice was tired, like she had run out of words. I love you. He looked into the darkness. What could he say? I know. I love you too. Just sign the papers. Silence filled the room. They felt it deeply. They had known each other so well for so long that they could both sense the weight of the split. It was like a thread that had been broken between them, a connection that could never be repaired. He wished he could listen to her breathe forever. But he also wanted to forget that sound. He turned away. A dog, he thought. The little barks. You learn to walk. You take small, wobbly steps. You lean to one side, then the other. Maybe your mom is there, arms open wide, and you want to reach her. You trust her, so you lean forward. You took a step. She cheers with joy. You are walking. Your brain notices what happens and makes new pathways. New ways of moving connect through your body. You keep walking. Sometimes you stumble, but your brain learns. It helps you adjust. You keep trying again and again until you're running. You dash and leap without thinking. Your brain is set up to do this automatically, guiding your body in the right direction. Next comma, you learn to throw. A stone, a small piece of dirt. At 3 years old, your throws often miss their aim, but your brain figures it out. Your arm learns the right angle to throw, and your hand knows when to let go so it can fly toward the target. Repeat this many times, using rocks and baseballs until your body works together perfectly. You feel the smooth texture in your hands. The baseball, made of soft leather and a rubber core, flies quickly through the air, almost disappearing from view, landing precisely in the first baseman's glove, right where you aimed. It, quote, S automatic. It, quote, S about success. It, quote, S the third inning of the last game of the season. Toronto is at bat with 1 out and no runners on base. Bryan crouches down, trying to see the catcher's signs. He wants to know where the ball will be pitched so he can get ready to move. He thinks back. For some reason, his usual focus, the sharpness that has made him a top player, slips away for a moment. Maybe it was the phone call. He suddenly recalls a memory of Lauren, looking at him with warmth in her eyes, her hair a mess. The batter swings at a pitch, but it's an easy hit. The ball rolls towards Bryan, a simple play. No strange bounces, nothing tricky. Just a normal play. He gets ready. The ball lands firmly in his glove. He turns, pulls the ball out, sets his feet, and throws. But he misses the target completely, throwing the ball into the dugout. The crowd gasps. A loud collective, "Oh!" Disappointment fills the air. The runner takes off for first, then jogs to second easily. The ball is out of play and no one is in danger. He walks past Bryan, who is standing still in disbelief. The ball is picked up and put back in play. The players gather on the mound for a quick break to think about their strategy for handling a runner on second base. Bryan is still in shock. This feels worse than being hurt. It's as if his own body is letting him down for no reason. His teammates pat him on the back. It happens sometimes. Even the pitcher says sorry for using too much rosin on the ball. 2 innings later, a bunt gets past the pitcher. Bryan runs hard to catch it. He has so much time that he pauses, steps toward first base, and throws it underhand to Mitch, right into his glove. The runner is out. Doubts start to fade. But in the bottom of the 8th, Bryan turns to his left to catch a tough one-hopper. He has plenty of time. He prepares and throws, but it goes over Mitch's head. Mitch jumps. That's one reason why first basemen are usually chosen for their height and reach. But he can't get there this time. Another missed play, another mistake, and now there's a runner on third who scores. In the end, it doesn't matter much. The Sox are ahead by 4 runs, but it does matter. Bryan now officially has the yips. Oh, the reporters were curious. They tried to ask him about this after the game. No one used the term directly. They danced around the idea. They wanted an exciting headline, but they knew their audience. The Boston fans are known for being tough critics, but they still want the Sox to win. Bryan answered their questions as best as he could. He hadn't figured out another way to tell his story anyway. They seemed content when he said that he didn't dwell on his mistakes and was just glad the team had won. On his way to the parking lot, he noticed that someone had put up the current standings in a window on the second floor of a nearby high-rise, Boston W102 L59, New York W101 L60. Bryan looked at the numbers. If the Sox won tomorrow, they would take the division and avoid the wild card round. If they lost but the Yankees also lost, the result would be the same. But if the Sox lost and the Yankees won, they would be tied. That would mean a one-game playoff between the two teams. The winner would take the division title and have the home field advantage. The loser would end up in the wild card tournament struggling to recover. The Yankees were just 1 game behind. It was the last game of the regular season, and the Blue Jays had nothing to gain. They were out of the playoffs. Win or lose, they would head home to pack their things and wait for next year. The Red Sox had everything to motivate them. Fenway Park was full. Cotillo had set up the pitching rotation so that their top pitcher would start. All the regular players were in the lineup. It was the best way to approach a game they really wanted to win. They lost. They really lost. To be fair, winning 102 games is quite an accomplishment. It means they won 63% of the time, but that's not perfect. Some days a team just doesn't perform well, or the other team plays exceptionally, or sometimes both happen. Sadly for the Red Sox, it was one of those days. Much later, Bryan was sitting in his comfy chair with a beer, the TV dark. He was intentionally ignoring the remote on the table. He did not want to see any part of that game again. He didn't want to watch his team's star pitcher struggle. 5 walks in the first 2 innings. He also didn't want to see the series of relief pitchers who came in and let in 4 home runs. He didn't want to see himself at all. In the second inning, he had fielded a ground ball but threw it way too short of first base. Luckily, Mitch managed to catch the ball and get the out, making the play look easier than it was. But Mitch couldn't help when Bryan threw a relay from left field right past the catcher and into another team's dugout. Later, he just stood there as Bryan sent a simple ground ball far down the line, leaving Mitch no choice but to watch. By the 8th inning, Bryan's usually sharp baseball brain had stopped working. He felt frustrated, and thankfully the whole team was struggling together. No one blamed him for the bad game, but he blamed himself, which was why he sat in his living room still wearing his full uniform. He was covered in dirt and still in his cleats. After the last pitch, Bryan had trudged through the clubhouse and gone home. He grabbed a second beer and looked at the note he had left for himself on the fridge after returning from Arizona. Even if obstacles come, they are like clouds that drift in front of the sun but never block its light. Seneca. He thought that Seneca might not have enjoyed being a Red Sox fan with that mindset. He knew the newspaper would focus on him. The idea of the yips was too tempting for catchy headlines. Everyone could understand having a bad moment, regardless of their job, even if they didn't get the complex problems that a pitcher faces during a game. Most people don't often get a chance to embarrass themselves in front of a huge crowd, both live and online. He was in the bathroom enjoying a beer with one hand and trying to aim when the doorbell rang. He almost spilled his drink but managed to steady himself. Who could be visiting at this hour? He quickly tossed the empty bottle in the trash, fixed his clothes, and glanced at the clock as he walked into the kitchen. 10 minutes past midnight. Then he remembered. The Yankees had won. The White Sox hadn't even tried hard. He had a strong dislike for Chicago and everyone associated with it. He couldn't stand the band and the musical either. The play-in game was tomorrow, so he knew he needed some rest. When he opened the door, Melody walked right in without waiting. She looked him up and down. "I thought you guys cleaned up at the park." "I jogged home," he replied. She nodded, giving the impression that maybe she believed him. She moved around the house, checking out the kitchen first, then the living room, and finally the dining room. Why is it so tidy? Do you have a cleaner? It's just me, he said. I take care of my own space. She turned to him. I heard you played poorly tonight, you in particular. He had always liked the saying bums rush because it was colorful. He imagined giving her a rude exit from his door onto the wet grass outside. So you came here just to bother me, as always. She grabbed the front of his shirt. Bryan was lost in thought about baseball jerseys when she said, "What a jerk." Then she leaned in, and in that moment he felt the world around him slip away. What just happened? He finally managed to say when she pulled back slightly to regain her breath. But she smiled, then leaned in again, enjoying the moment. Say something in Greek, she instructed. At that moment, Bryan struggled to speak, but then he remembered a few phrases. He looked into her eyes and shared a translation. Every heart has a song that isn't complete until another heart responds. Those who want to sing always find their song. With a lover's touch, everyone becomes a poet. He stopped. That was Plato, believe it or not. She had somehow moved closer, and he could sense her warmth. Will you do that when we're together? She asked. Sure, I guess. Mel stepped back and looked at her jacket. Not tonight. You got dirt on my jacket. Bryan felt confused, his mind racing in different directions. Never mind, she said, brushing her jacket. This only added to his confusion. I came to tell you that Owen Archer is now married to his second wife. His first wife left him because of his many affairs. The current Mrs. Archer is living in Torrey Pines and will be moving to New Jersey with their 2 young children soon. Wow, Bryan said, realizing that his lawyer should have told him this news. He bet Lauren didn't know her supposed hero was already married. Then another thought struck him. Wow, again. It reminded him of what Mel had gone through with Jamie Rodriguez. He looked at her, and she seemed to understand. I guess you are a witch, he said. She gave him a disapproving look. What kind of thing is that to say? Never mind, bad comparison, he said after thinking for a moment. He pointed at her. I thought you were working at your dad's company. A merger, she replied with a shrug. Even her shrug seemed like part of a plan. And you working on my case is just a coincidence? Just luck? As far as you know? He shook his head. What a mess. She pressed her lips together. Show me to your guest room. I'm not driving back up 95 at this hour. You? She raised her hand to stop him. Don't even start. I won't be blamed if you don't do well tomorrow. Who said I won't do well? The Red Sox and the Yankees were tied for first place. Bryan woke up early and prepared a breakfast of whole wheat toast with blueberry jam, cherry yogurt, and mango smoothie on the kitchen island. He was just sitting down to eat when Melody came down the stairs in one of his University of Texas t-shirts. He froze with a slice of toast halfway to his mouth. Several thoughts rushed through his mind. He hoped she had found a clean shirt. He wondered if this was right, and he realized there was only a thin fabric between him figuring out her natural hair color. The air suddenly felt different. She yawned and sat down, looking completely at ease, helped herself to some toast and poured a glass of the smoothie. Where's the bacon? Where's the eggs? She asked with a mouthful of toast. He swallowed, distracted by her outfit. Just a healthy breakfast. Low fat, she commented. No fun, she said as she finished the slice. She stood up, walked around the table, and sat on the edge where another place setting might have been. Bryan felt confused and asked, What are you doing? She gave him a look that made her intentions clear, conveying her support without words. In his surprise, Bryan pushed his plate aside, sending it and his glass tumbling off the table. He reached out, gently moving her closer to him. The intensity of the moment took over, and without hesitation, they shared a deep connection, with Bryan fully focused on the situation. Her face lit up with a wide smile, and her hands reached for him. They shared a moment of closeness, one that expressed the trust and warmth they felt for each other. It was clear they were fully in the moment, completely absorbed in each other's presence. Bryan felt more present than ever before. His mind was racing, his heart pounding as they locked eyes. She whispered words of happiness and wrapped her arms around him tightly, reflecting the bond they were building. Together, they experienced a rush of emotions, and though no words were spoken, it was clear they were sharing something deeply personal and meaningful. Every muscle in Bryan's body tensed, and he felt a rush of overwhelming sensations for what seemed like a long moment. Somehow, Bryan found himself back in his chair, with Mel now sitting on his lap, their connection evident as they remained close. "What are you doing?" Bryan asked again, once the confusion in his mind began to clear. "I thought you hated me." Mel leaned back, her messy hair framing her face as she looked at him in a way that made him realize he still had a lot to learn about her. "I did. I really did hate you," she said, though her next reaction was anything but hateful. "I know Bree told you about Rodriguez." "She did, but she told me in confidence." "I saw her that day," Mel continued. "I looked over his shoulder and saw her leaving the cabana, but I didn't care. I was in love." Bryan gently pulled away, and Mel shivered, letting out a soft, light-hearted laugh. "I was young, and I thought I knew what love was. I should have taken more time, but I was always the responsible one, working hard, focused on my future, trying to live up to expectations. And then, when I thought I understood love, it hit me like a ton of bricks. So yeah, he was my first, and nobody ever told me how strong those feelings would be." She paused, thinking about the past. "But why did you treat me the way you did?" Bryan asked. She sighed and looked down, her expression softening. "I treated you like that because I thought you were just another guy who would say anything to win me over. And I was scared. I didn't hate you. I was angry with myself because I realized I wasn't as in control as I thought. I was vulnerable, and that scared me. I hated myself because you were smart, kind, good-looking, and you knew how to speak ancient Greek," she said with frustration. Bryan tilted his head. "That time I translated Homer for you, it felt like it really upset you." "You're such a fool," she snapped, glaring at him. "I wasn't upset. I was excited. Hearing you speak like that, I had to leave the room to calm myself down." Bryan started laughing. "What's so funny?" she asked, still angry. "Hey, relax," he said, noticing her tension. She eased up a bit, and Bryan told her a story about how another friend of his had a similar experience while studying Latin. "There's something about those old languages, huh?" he said. "Maybe there's a way to make money off that," he joked. They sat quietly for a while as Bryan held her close, planting gentle kisses on her neck. "I'm sorry," he said after a moment. "For what?" She looked genuinely confused. "I'm still technically married, and I thought—" "Stop thinking," she interrupted. "I'm here to make things simple for you." "Oh, right. And I should have been more careful." She shrugged, her casual movement catching Bryan's attention. He felt a spark of energy, and his mind wandered for a moment. "How big is your shower?" she asked, shifting around. "I need to clean up." Bryan's shower was large, but that didn't matter. As they washed, Mel shivered and bit her lip. "This isn't exactly relaxing," she whispered. He quickly rinsed them both off, then carried her to the bed, placing her gently in the middle. They playfully slid against each other, caught up in the moment. "I don't have any protection," Bryan admitted, feeling unsure. "It's fine," she said. "Let's just enjoy this." They came together, their movements natural and without hesitation, sharing a quiet moment that seemed to say more than words ever could. Mel had found a way to feel good, guiding Bryan's movements with her body. The faster he moved, the more she expressed her feelings, but then, without warning, she suddenly went quiet and still. Bryan felt a change in her, and something inside him responded strongly. They lay on the rumpled bed, not touching, just looking at the ceiling. "You could still take her back," she finally said. Bryan turned to face her. "Are you my lawyer or my girlfriend? Your easiest and least costly choice is to forgive." He reached out softly and touched her gently. He felt a little tension in her body at his touch, which made him feel good. "I have thought about it," he said. "I've been thinking a lot about us. Do you know what the yips are?" She shook her head. He went on to explain how the yips are like little worries that can sneak in and change how you act. Hypocrisy is an old word. Am I being unfair by hoping the team will forgive me when I can't forgive Lauren? "She chose to leave you," Mel said. "You don't choose to make mistakes." Bryan frowned. "I know, but we have history." If she walked in right now and said sorry, I would have a hard time sending her away. Mel stood up, wrapping herself in a towel she found on the floor. It seemed strange to Bryan since they had been so close before, and he wondered if she was upset with him. Something felt off. As your lawyer, I suggest going for it. Forgive her. She touched him lightly on the chest, but she didn't say more. Instead, the silence hung in the air, both of them lost in thought. She was certain he would forgive the woman he loved. She had felt it the first time she saw his kind face, and her belief only grew as she talked to her sisters about him and observed his actions from a distance and up close. He had a good heart. Of course, he would forgive her. She hadn't heard their wedding promises, but he would have genuinely committed to standing by his wife through all of life's ups and downs. Bree had told her that tougher times had been hard on Lauren. But forget? Not a chance. This man held on to stories from long ago, connecting with thoughts from the past. No comma he would not forget, so forgiveness wouldn't change anything. He and his wife were finished. Part of Melody wanted to find Lauren and confront her for hurting him. Another part wanted to thank her for allowing him to move forward. She lowered her hand. He lay very still. I have never given up on anything in my life, Melody. Should I just let her go without trying? Do I owe her that? She wrapped the towel around herself more tightly. Can you stay in a marriage without full trust in your partner? He looked up at her, shaking his head slightly. She thought for a moment. Are you even sure they have? He raised an eyebrow. Yeah, she agreed. Don't even think about it, Damon, Bryan said to his manager. He found Castillo where he expected him to be, sitting alone at the edge of the dugout, staring at the perfectly green grass of Fenway Park. The manager liked to come here when it was quiet to go over his notes, watch videos on his tablet, and think about plans for the upcoming game. He reviewed the other team's batters, fielders, patterns, and many stats in various colorful charts. Bryan knew it was the moment when his manager took a blank lineup card and wrote down the names of the players. I need to be in this game. Damon removed his cap and scratched his head. I understand. It's tough sometimes. Look, it happens. I get it. But I've been hitting well. It was true. Kaplan, the Yankees' second pitcher, was set to pitch, and Bryan had been performing really well against him. I know how to handle him. Look at the rest of the team. Is anyone else doing even close to as well? Castillo thought for a moment and then shook his head. He was known as a modern baseball manager who relied heavily on numbers and facts. Now, one of his players was asking him to trust his instinct. The stats suggested sitting Bryan out, but his instinct was pushing him to put Bryan in the game. He felt the pressure of deciding based on instinct or numbers. If he guessed right, he'd be celebrated, but if things went wrong... All right, he finally said. You're in. Bryan smiled and started singing one of his favorite songs, making the grounds crew look up and chuckle. You've got to have heart. All you really need is heart. When the odds say you won't win, that's when you should begin to grin. Come on, manager. You know the words. Castillo grabbed his bag of sunflower seeds, took some into his mouth, and pointed toward the clubhouse. Mitch Rollins watched as the bench coach tossed the ball lightly and hit it towards the second base area. He held his breath as Bryan caught the ball and threw it, right into Mitch's glove. Mitch didn't need to worry at all. Rollins felt a strong urge to rush over and cheer for his friend and teammate, but one didn't mention the nerves. Acknowledging the nerves meant they were real, and he hoped they wouldn't bother him. After finishing their field drills, the team gathered in front of the dugout. Some players practiced swings with a weighted bat or stretched while waiting for their turn in the batting cage. Bryan hit a lot of pitches perfectly and then headed to the clubhouse for a quick snack and to put on his uniform. He was filled with excitement. Just 10 minutes before the game began, the Red Sox players ran onto the field. The starting lineup was displayed on the big screen, showcasing each player as they either waved or acknowledged the cheering fans. Mitch looked over with a big smile when Bryan's face appeared on the screen. However, his smile faded when he noticed Bryan staring into the crowd with concern. Mitch suddenly felt uneasy. He walked over to Bryan, trying to appear calm despite the crowd. "What's wrong?" Mitch asked, still smiling without moving his lips, trying to lighten the mood. Bryan didn't respond. Mitch followed his gaze and spotted a familiar face in the front row, right behind the Red Sox dugout. "Hey, is that your wife?" he asked, noticing another fan, a big guy, making his way to the empty seat beside her. "Who's the man with her?" Bryan stayed silent. Mitch glanced around for support, but nothing came. He quickly took off his cap for the national anthem. During the brief moments it took for a young Army officer to sing, Bryan realized he could never go back to the way things were. Even if she showed up at his door asking for another chance, he would not let her in. The mean disrespect, showing up with her new partner to distract him tonight? On live TV? That was just too much. The umpire shouted, "Play ball!" and the most important game of the season began. Meanwhile, the Boston second baseman felt a storm of emotions swirling in his mind and stomach, so strong he thought everyone in the park would be able to hear it. Luckily, second base was not involved in any action during the first half of the inning. The first two batters missed their chances to hit. The third player hit a high ball into the sky that made the home crowd gasp in shock. They then cheered with relief as the left fielder caught it just in time. Before the ball landed in the fielder's glove, Bryan was already racing toward the dugout. He dashed down the tunnel leading to the clubhouse. Just as he reached the door, he felt someone yank him back. He turned around, trying to shake off Mitch's strong grip. "What are you doing?" Mitch shouted. "You're up next. Get out there." "She broke up with me." Mitch's eyes narrowed. "Lauren?" He was starting to piece things together. "That guy." Bryan nodded sadly. Mitch let go of him. "That must be Owen Archer, right? I didn't realize it at first. What's he doing here? Why is she with him?" Mitch's anger grew more than Bryan's. "Is she trying to upset you on purpose?" Bryan shook his head. "That's not her style." "Then it must be that guy trying to show you up." Bryan nodded, feeling down. "But why? I don't understand." "Because he's not a good person." Mitch snapped his fingers and pointed at Bryan in a way that might have made him laugh if he weren't so shocked. "It's all about money," Mitch said with a scowl. He slapped Bryan's chest with his big glove. Bryan didn't understand. "Gambling." Mitch threw his head back and laughed loudly. "The fool bet on the Yankees. He probably paid a lot of money for those seats, so you'd have to look up at them every time you threw two first. What a jerk. He's counting on your nerves." "I don't have a problem," Bryan shouted. But he did, and he knew it. Every baseball player understood it. The nerves were always there, waiting quietly in the background. Then, out of nowhere, they would spike and affect your game. The bat boy rushed down the tunnel, anxious and flustered, and handed Bryan his batting helmet and gloves. Bryan stood by the on-deck circle, swinging his bat and deliberately not looking at the dugout. The Sox's leadoff batter had just grounded out. The next batter, the shortstop, waited for a 3-2 pitch to cross the plate. The crowd grumbled, but the umpire signaled for a walk to first base. Fenway's aging structure shook with the cheers of over 37,000 fans. Bryan waited until he knew the cameras would be on him, then he raised his bat and clearly pointed to Megan's name. No matter what happened, the press would want to know about that. He glanced down at the third base coach, who was giving him confusing signals. No action. He walked slowly to the plate and went through his usual routine. He tapped his cleats, touched the plate, leaned back, stretched his arms high, brought them down into position, and took a deep breath. But it didn't help. The actions meant to calm him felt as useless as dry leaves blown around by a strong wind. He trembled with frustration, his teeth clenched tightly, and his jaw muscles tensed. He had never played with this much anger before. He feared he would swing wildly and leave the field in embarrassment, facing the teasing eyes of Owen Archer. That thought only made him angrier, which the catcher noticed and quickly changed the number of fingers he signaled. He slowly moved his glove into position. Kaplan prepared to pitch. His catcher first signaled for a slider away, then suddenly changed his mind to a fastball high and tight. It wasn't the usual strategy for facing Monick, but Kaplan had faith in his catcher. This guy had supported him through all of his 18 wins, and now was not the time to second guess. Bryan focused on the approaching ball. He couldn't visualize the play like usual. Frustration clouded his thoughts. He saw the ball as a bright white object coming straight at him. He felt a strong impulse to reach out and swing with all his might. He disliked that ball with a passion, and that feeling seemed to give him extra strength. The world around him faded away. All he saw was that growing white sphere. Bryan swung, and it felt like his entire being was behind that motion. It was as if the swing had its own purpose, carrying every ounce of his weight to meet the ball head-on. Then, suddenly, sound returned. Roars from the crowd filled the air as he stepped out of the batter's box. He ran. He let go of the bat as he hurried away, glancing to his left to see the fielder and gauge his speed. But no one was catching this ball. Not this time. The crowd's cheers surrounded him like a wave, their excitement lifting him up. The white ball soared higher and higher under the bright lights, sailing against the dark sky above the outfield wall. Up and over it went. As he crossed home plate, his teammates rushed to celebrate, lifting him up and cheering as he made his way to the dugout. He was so happy that he didn't even think about Lauren and Archer sitting not far away. He hugged and high-fived everyone in the dugout, drank some water, popped a fresh piece of gum in his mouth, and then grabbed his glove to focus on the game again. He watched as Mitch hit a long fly ball out, and the next batter hit the ball right to third base. He ran back onto the field. The park was alive with excitement, with the Sox ahead by 2 runs and their starter doing well. The first batter for the Yankees hit a line drive to shortstop. The second batter hit the ball sharply toward Bryan's right. He turned and caught it, but paused for a moment that probably nobody noticed unless they watched it over and over. Bryan had just come down from the joy of hitting. Suddenly, the doubts he had pushed away came rushing back. He shouted sharply at the shortstop, who had also run for the ball. The shortstop was looking at Bryan. Bryan tossed the ball from his glove to the shortstop, who threw it to Mitch. The runner was out by plenty. Fenway Park erupted in cheers, believing they had just seen a clever and quick play. The announcers from different broadcasts were all saying it was great. The Spanish announcer excitedly called it muy bien. In simple terms, the second baseman got to the ball in time but was going the wrong way to make the throw, so he passed it to the player who was already facing first base. Bryan knew it wasn't really impressive. He could have turned and thrown the ball. He had done it many times before. But in that moment of doubt, his fear of making a mistake changed what he did. It wasn't a smart play. It felt like a foolish one. The chances of his simple toss to the shortstop going wrong were much higher than if he had just kept the ball and made the play himself. He kicked at the dirt, unhappy with his choice. When he glanced over at the dugout, he saw Archer smiling at him. Archer knew Bryan was having a tough time. Then Archer leaned toward Lauren. Bryan felt a wave of frustration. It was so strong that he had to look down at his shoes and press his hands on his knees to calm himself. He noticed that Lauren wasn't entirely at ease. She seemed to be slightly retreating from Archer. It looked like she didn't want to be there, but she was. It felt like she was caught up in something. Maybe it was the promises she had made to herself as a girl, promises that had grown more important over time, a promise a girl felt she had to keep as an adult. Bryan wished he had some kind of magic to help her, something to offer her comfort and support tonight. The umpire called for a break to get new balls and clean the home plate. Bryan used that moment to look up at the stars and take a few deep breaths. The next batter from the other team stepped up, ready to face Bryan. He got back into position. It was a small step towards first base because this batter usually hit the ball towards the right side. The batter swung and missed the ball. He let another pitch go by for a ball. The catcher signaled for a low pitch and Bryan got ready, standing on his toes. This was a perfect moment for a play. It really was. The pitcher threw a strong, sinking ball. The batter swung but was just a bit too high. The ball hit the toe of his left shoe and rolled quickly towards Bryan. "Dead ball!" the umpire shouted, raising both arms as the batter hopped around in discomfort. The players relaxed. Not Bryan. He took 3 quick steps to the rolling baseball, bent down and picked it up with his bare hand. Play until the play is over. He learned that lesson early on. So what if everyone in the park saw the ball was dead? Bryan saw a ball in his area. He instinctively moved to field it as if a player was running to first base dot. He held the ball tightly, straightened up, and looked towards first base dot. Mitch was off the bag, not ready for a throw dot. Bryan glanced behind first into the stands. Archer leaned toward Lauren, sharing a comment, a smile on his face. Bryan prepared to throw dot. Lauren met his eyes. Once his wife, once a close friend, once a cherished partner. They might have built a family and aged together if things had been different. He never would have guessed about her hidden fears. Her eyes showed a depth of feeling. He pictured a small, sad girl sitting alone in the hot Texas sun, feeling unseen. Bryan moved towards his target. Yes, they had promised each other. They had taken vows. But she had made promises to herself long before they ever met. Any anger he felt had faded, leaving only sympathy for her and sadness for what she had lost. He threw his arm forward, focused on where he wanted the ball to go. Everyone knew he had trouble with his throws. When his throw went way off and didn't even come close to first base, it wasn't a surprise. The ball zoomed straight and hit just where Bryan aimed. A baseball thrown with a lot of force, like how Bryan could throw, carried a lot of energy. It made a sharp impact right by Owen Archer's head. The noise was awful, like a pumpkin smashing on the ground. The crowd of over 35,000 fell silent for a moment, all hearing the hit and wincing together. The team gathered on the mound while they waited. Doctors and nurses, who were always at the games, hurried to help Owen. They carefully laid him down on the old steps, checked his vital signs, looked at his head and face, pressed on the injury, and put on a temporary bandage. This took almost half an hour. Bryan noticed Lauren standing not too far from Owen, looking shocked and covering her mouth after what she had seen. When the medical team put Owen on a stretcher and started to take him out, she stood there for a moment, unsure if she should follow or stay. Bryan saw her glance at him, but then he got caught up in a talk between the catcher and pitcher about the next batters. A little later, he looked back and noticed she was gone. Cotillo walked over, but Bryan just gave a calm and confident smile. His coach frowned for a moment, then shook his head and went back to the dugout without making any changes. The fans started the familiar chant, "Yankees suck." Throughout the game, there was a steady cheer from the crowd, especially from those who held on to traditional views. When the music stopped and the highlights began, the cheers grew louder. Then, someone in the stands heard news about a player needing an ambulance, which changed the chant to, "Yankees suck, Jets suck too." Bryan felt a bit guilty because he couldn't help but smile widely. He stretched out his arms like he was ready to catch a beach ball and spun in a circle. The fans were tough and never let up. They were shouting at someone who was in real trouble. Yet he loved them all, from those wearing bright pink hats to the older folks who were used to playing the lottery. They were all a part of his community. He loved this city. When he finally got home, she was sitting in the porch glider. He didn't bother to check the time. He sat next to her and wrapped his arm around her. She felt cold. "Your cologne smells nice," Mel said. Funny thing about, he never finished his sentence because a cheerful redhead leaned in and greeted him warmly. When the game started again, the Yankees played with determination. They seemed to think that success was just out of reach on the Red Sox side. They aimed for the balls headed for Bryan, but it didn't turn out well for them. Bryan skillfully caught the first 2 ground balls and tossed them to Mitch. Then they tried softer hits, but he turned those into easy outs, making it look effortless. Wherever the trouble had come from, it had slipped back away. By the time everyone in the park realized that Bryan was once again the great player he had always been, a top infielder, it was too late. The relief pitchers had been doing really well for the last month, and they kept it up. The visiting team left quietly as Fenway Park grew louder and the crowd erupted in cheers, sounding like a powerful storm. The night ended with everyone celebrating together on the pitcher's mound, and joy filled the locker room. Bryan took a moment to breathe and pulled out his phone. She picked up right away. "Hi, champ." "Hi, sis. I just wanted to say thank you." "She's there, isn't she?" "How did you know?" "Just a feeling." "Bye. And Bryan, you're welcome." He turned to Melody. "Bree says hello." Melody gently ran her fingers through his hair. "I saw the throw. Aren't you worried?" "Nope. Everyone knows I was having a tough time with my throws. I didn't know where that ball would go when I let it go." She looked concerned. With that kind of thinking, you might want to get some help for good. Epilogue: The following spring. "When do you get the ring?" a guy next to him at the bar asked, holding a pint of beer. Bryan was watching the dance floor. He turned and smiled at the man who introduced himself a little while ago. Joe, Jim, another friend of Kevin's. Another big Dodgers fan. Bryan thought the crowd would be unfriendly. The groom's side was mostly made up of LAPD officers, and they were loyal Dodgers fans. The bride's side was from the movie industry, wearing fancy hats and claiming to love their home team. But in Bryan's experience, they didn't show it as passionately as the cops. Unfriendly. Monick and his team had lit up like a bright flare after beating the Yankees. They were like big stones rolling down a hill, looking to break through anything in their way. The big snowstorm had knocked out the Twins and then the Astros. By the time the Sox played the Dodgers in the World Series, it was clear what was going to happen. The Sox won 4-1, and it wasn't even that close. Fortunately, the police were fans of baseball and enjoyed the way the Sox played. They didn't like the results, but they admired the effort. The players were fast, tough, and always got dirty. They had solid pitching, good defense, and sometimes hit home runs. Most of the people who came to watch had already moved on to cheer for the Lakers instead. There's a ceremony on opening day. Thursday, Bryan said. That's when we get to see the new uniforms and try them on. They raised their glasses and looked around. Most people were dancing. Off to the side, Melody was deep in conversation with Kevin and his new wife. Sharon was looking at Melody as if she were special. Kevin only had eyes for Sharon, who looked stunning in her white dress. The guy nodded toward the dance floor. Is that your wife? Not yet. Kevin says Sharon wants to go to law school all of a sudden. I'm not surprised. Bryan watched Melody in her green dress. Just yesterday, in their hotel room, she had been looking out at the sunset. She looked beautiful. It made him realize that he wanted to create a life together with her. The thought of her nurturing a child filled him with a unique excitement. He felt a bit dizzy. It was hard to catch his breath. He envisioned being a father. Then she turned to face him, looking serious but happy, the sunlight glowing around her. She smiled. And he felt better. He thought about Bree's words concerning her sister and how she had something special that pushed her to be her best. He could feel it like a tingling sensation. It was a clear understanding that came to him without doubt. She would strive to be the best, a loving and devoted partner. Poets from long ago would be envious because they hadn't had the chance to know her. At the gathering, the organizers gathered the single women together and handed a bouquet to Sharon. She turned away from them and tossed the flowers high into the air, almost touching the big chandelier in the center of the large room. As the bouquet fell, a hand reached out above the rest, a strong hand belonging to a tall woman. The crowd gasped and cheered, then moved aside. Bryan caught a glimpse of Melody facing him, holding the flowers. Their eyes locked, and they shared a moment of deep understanding. Epilogue. 5 years later, he had done a great job with the sign years ago. He had prepared the wood, painted it white, then used black letters and finished it with a protective coat. It still looked good. Yet he knew the translation could be better. If he had to do it again, he would change the wording. But he wasn't going to make it again. It was a reminder of that time. Can I put the flowers in now, Daddy? Bryan handed the yellow roses wrapped in crinkly green paper to his daughter. Here you go, Breezer. Take off the paper and make sure the stems go in the water. The little girl carefully unwrapped the flowers and placed them into the stone vase one by one, focusing hard like any 4-year-old would. The morning sky was bright with fluffy little clouds that wouldn't bring any rain to southern Texas at this time of year. The sun was already strong, and it wasn't even noon yet. The temperature was already in the 80s. Bryan felt for Mel. 7 months pregnant, she was resting on a couch in front of the air conditioner at his parents' house. She and his mom were probably looking through family names for the baby. Bryan thought it would be nice to name the baby Ashford after Mel's dad. It was a cool name, simple and unique, with no embarrassing meanings. However, Mel wanted the next name to come from her side of the family since their daughter was named after his sister. Bryan would get the final say on the name, he guessed. When are we going home, Daddy? Little Bree asked, making small changes to her toy arrangement. Tomorrow, Breezer. Daddy has to go back to work. At the park? That's right, back to the park. Do you want to come and watch? Yes, I like the hot dogs, Bryan smiled. Toddlers are easy to please. Daddy? Bree asked, standing by a polished pink granite headstone. "Who is buried here?" "A friend," he replied. "A girl I went to school with." Little Bree was in preschool and understood school and graves, but she couldn't grasp how one of his friends ended up there. She suddenly turned and ran into his arms. He dropped his bat and lifted her up, holding her tightly as if she was his whole world. He thought about Owen Archer. If it hadn't been for him, this lovely child might not be here. It was unfortunate that Archer didn't benefit from it. An NFL quarterback struggled if he couldn't see clearly. He was let go during the season due to his blurry vision. Since his injury wasn't from football, he didn't have any support. He had his guaranteed millions, but his second wife took a large part of it in the divorce. Even after everything, he had enough money to last a while. But he had a habit of gambling. He lost money in Las Vegas, lost at the racetrack, and even lost on sports bets. Then a group of clever people convinced him to put a large amount of his money into their new cryptocurrency. His grandmother's saying came true: "A fool and his money are soon parted." At least Lauren had not lost everything with him. When things started to go wrong for Bryan, she quickly sought safety elsewhere. The last he heard from Bree, who always stayed updated through her friends, was that Lauren had sold their house and moved in with a founder of a local biotech company which seemed to be everywhere in the Boston area. He called his ex-wife at New Year and was glad to hear that she still attended therapy. He was also happy to know she had enough money saved up. She should never have to worry about money again. He hoped this was true, but he recognized that how people see themselves can be very different from how others see them, and from the reality of the situation. He had once loved her, and she had been with him during tough times, but she had hit a wall she had built inside herself. "We need to get back to Grammy and Grampy's house, Breezer. It's almost pool time." He tickled her, and she giggled. The brief sadness faded away. He picked up the bat, carried his daughter to the grave, and leaned the bat against the headstone. He touched it gently one last time. It might be worth a lot at an auction, he thought. 3 singles, 3 doubles, 1 triple, and 2 home runs. He didn't find out that it matched the record for hits in a 5-game series until 2 weeks after their loud duckboat celebration. It couldn't just sit on a wall and be unhappy. A tall hardwood tree in a Pennsylvania forest was cut down, dried, and shaped. It was swung thousands of times and stood quietly next to a desk for 5 years. It was touched gently every day. It was time to finish the story. Little Bree looked down and squinted as she read the letters on the bat and on the stone. "Is that the same word?" she asked, proud of her reading skills and amazed to see the same pattern on 2 different things. "Yes, it is, dear little Breezer Weezer. One day I'll tell you all about it." He set her down, and they walked side by side on the path that led back to the gate and their car. The bat stayed behind. He knew that someday, and he hoped it would be soon, a child would come through the cemetery and discover it. That boy or girl would take the bat home and use it to hit thousands of balls for many years until it became worn and its story came to an end.
What's up, story lovers? This is the Story Guy, and if you're hungry for crazy tales and mind-blowing narratives, you've come to the right place. Don't forget to smash that subscribe button so you don't miss out on our weekly dose of crazy cheating stories, fun fiction, and gut-ripping comedy from around the world. But that's not all. We also create our own original stories, and trust me, you won't find these anywhere else. Want even more spine-tingling reads? Head down to the description and grab our exclusive story collections. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.